Welcome everyone to the Patient Voice Amplified podcast. We're excited to be back with you to amplify the voice and the needs of the patient in healthcare. I'm joined by Adam. It's good to be with you again today.
You too, Dan. Thanks.
Well, we're excited to talk to today's guest. Adam, do you want to talk a little bit about who we're going to be speaking with today?
Yeah, really excited. This is a friend of class, Caroline Delongchamps from Medical University of South Carolina. She is the manager of patient and family-centered care at MUSC, and she's the mother of a pediatric trauma patient and turned that into a lifelong passion and career of helping others. So has an amazing story. She also manages patient and family advisory councils for MUSC. So really has a very special perspective of healthcare and technology, and both as the mother of a patient and turned it into a career. So it's going to be
exciting.
Great.
It'll be fun to talk to her.
Yep.
So Adam, why don't we start? We like to usually talk about things we're overhearing here at class. A little segment we call Overheard at Class. Have you heard anything lately in a conversation with a vendor or provider that stuck out to you?
You know, Dan, just 3 days ago, there was a provider organization that reached out to class and asked for our help on sorting through the myriad of solutions out there. This organization it plans to invest, plans to sort through technologies and bring in things that'll help patients. And they said, here's a list of a few dozen things we want to accomplish. Can you narrow down all of these solutions to maybe 5 or 6 that we could focus on? And as you know, one of the class commandments is we never make recommendations. We let the data speak. So we took that to heart and tried to share some things that we know. We pointed them to the patient engagement ecosystem website, something you and I have worked on together. Yep. And I guess the little nugget I want to share is that healthcare is different. We've talked about this before, that people are trying to figure this out. You know, we're looking at the post-pandemic world of healthcare, digital health, and how do we sort through this? How do we make it better for patients? So more of a scenario than a specific learning. We feel that people are still asking these type of questions, and that's really what we love to do, right? It's deep in our culture. Let's help them. Let's give them access to things, and that's a big part of our mission.
I'm curious, what was the organization's driver for this conversation? Are they looking to consolidate their technology footprint, or are they looking to increase their digital health offerings? What drove the conversation?
More the latter, more how do we do more with less? So I think there is some consolidation they're looking at. Trying to make sense of it, knowing that patients are making different requests than they did even 18 months ago. But the idea that there's so many things they want to accomplish, but keep it within a small group of solutions, that's where it's coming from.
Interesting.
So Dan, how about you? What things did you hear this week?
Yeah, it was fun. You and I had a good chance to talk to a group as part of the Millennium Alliance. They were holding a digital transformation summit, and we led a session on keeping the humanity in healthcare as you invest in technology purchasing decisions. And what a fun conversation. It's interesting to see more and more at conferences and summits these days that they're really bringing in the focus on the patient, and it's no longer how can we push patient engagement on the patients and meet our bottom line as an organization. They really truly are trying to focus on the patient, and as some of the things that we shared were around the influx of telehealth and the empowerment of patients as they are put front and center in their care going forward.
Right. Yeah, that title really resonated with us, didn't it? How do we keep humanity in healthcare? You know, the example I just shared with that organization, there's so many solutions out there. Do we get lost in that sometimes? So I agree. That was a fun session with the Millennium Alliance yesterday that you and I got to present at. We were able to talk about some of the learnings from our recent telehealth performance report. We know that one of the important things you brought out is what the theme of 2021 feels like, and I'd love for you to share some of that with us.
Yeah, the thing that we're seeing a lot from these provider conversations is just meeting patients where they're at.
Yeah.
not trying to force a set of technologies on them or an experience on them, but really creating a multifaceted experience where the patient can guide themselves through the healthcare with nudges from the organization to meet their needs and to get the care that they need.
That's exactly right. And like I was saying on that telehealth performance report, we heard that specialty care is at the top of the list for providers. We heard remote patient monitoring, things literally meet the patient where they are.
Right, in the
they're,
home.
They're in the home. That's where a lot of the healing takes place, right? So
Right.
It also made me think of other examples. Recently we've shared what we've heard about Uber partnering up with, was it Walgreens to help with vaccines, Amazon delivering prescriptions. We've talked about that in the past. It wouldn't be a proper episode if I didn't bring up my Chick-fil-A example, Dan. It's every time they know who I am, they know what I like, they know how to take my payment. Chick-fil-A, if you're listening, it's time I get some free nuggets out of this. So,
It's funny, Adam, we arrived at the same time this morning, and as you were getting out of your car with your Chick-fil-A cup, I knew this was going to come up on today's podcast.
it just feels right. It just feels right. Dan, I want to go to our research minute and highlight some of the things we're hearing on research that we're conducting. As we've mentioned in other episodes, we've kicked off this digital front door study that we're doing. And you pinged me the other day and mentioned that you had a good call that you were excited to share. And can you talk about that? I think our listeners would find that interesting.
Yeah, it was a really fun conversation. I spent about 45 minutes with a VP of innovation at a large Midwest IDN, and he shared with me some of the innovative things they're doing around the digital front door. And as we got talking, he just kept opening up about all the different technology capabilities and vendors that they're working with to create this comprehensive digital front door strategy. I think I counted over 25 different vendors that they were either working with or leveraging their technology or infrastructure, or
Wow.
some that they had built themselves, homegrown applications. And they're tying all this together into a cohesive experience for the patient. And when I asked him, what are the outcomes that you're seeing? This is a big monumental effort that has taken them over a year to do. He shared that the biggest outcome they've seen is kind of a no-brainer, increased patient satisfaction. You hear that a lot. Mm-hmm. But what he said is not only are they seeing changes in the scores from patients, but they're hearing directly from providers that their patients are coming in more satisfied, which I thought was really interesting. You don't hear that feedback from the frontline care deliverers. You hear that oftentimes after the fact as they survey patients. But to create an experience up front as the patient's navigating their care that carries into the visit, and then the provider is sharing that with the technology staff is just fascinating to me.
Nice.
What a fun outcome.
Wow. So they're actually feeling it, experiencing, hey, this feels better, cleaner, simpler before they even come in.
Exactly. And they're
That's
sharing
great.
it with their provider.
Nice. That's great to hear. Well, I'm excited about that report and others that we're working on, and it'll be interesting to see where that goes. So thanks for sharing that one. Well, I think we should get to our guest today. I'm really excited to welcome in Caroline Delongchamps from Medical University of South Carolina. Very happy to have her join us.
Great.
Caroline, welcome. We're so happy to have you join the Class Patient Voice Amplified podcast. We're glad to have you here.
Thanks for the invitation.
We are so excited to hear your story about your family and the patient journey, but also how that's propelled you into healthcare and what you're doing today. Can you share with us a little background about you and your family, and tell us the Delongchamps story and how you got where you are?
Sure. So I wasn't always a healthcare professional. I actually changed careers, and as I've mentioned to you before, the reason I got into this work is to honor the men and women who saved my son's life, which sounds very noble. So really, maybe what is more about is the fact that I'm actually a healthcare stalker, and I am so enamored with the men and women who've chosen this vocation that I decided to learn more about it and make a career out of it. And the reason that happened is when my youngest son was 11 months old, we were outside with my 2-year-old, and we were waiting for my 8-year-old son to get off the bus, which was always like a little bit of a playtime in my neighborhood. The bus dropped all the kiddos off at my house, elementary school children off at my house. And so that's what we did. And Sam had been playing in one of those little plastic minivans that would keep him entertained for what seemed like a very long time. We were all playing, and I had gone to get the mail, and when I looked up, Sam's head was under the front right tire of an SUV. It's like your brain doesn't really make that connection between what is reality and perhaps a horrible episode of ER. So I found myself in the emergency department at our academic medical center here in Charleston, where he was triaged and intubated before being moved upstairs to the pediatric ICU. And I share this part of the story because I think this is sort of looking back what motivated me to not just find a career in healthcare, but is the reason I'm so enamored with the folks who do this work. So when Sam was transferred upstairs, we were separated from the first time. Since I had tried to, initially when the accident occurred, I tried to pull him out from under that tire unsuccessfully. I then moved to the front of the vehicle and tried to lift the vehicle off of him unsuccessfully. And so it was, as you might imagine, it was very gruesome. It was very traumatic. And so we're separated for the first time when he's moved to the ICU. And that allowed enough time for what I now know to be post-traumatic stress to sink in. So I had tapes of the accident that would play. They had audio and visual, and they would just play over and over in my brain. And I was scared because I knew I was about to get really important information about Sam's life that I literally would not be able to hear. I could see that you were talking, but I couldn't process the words. And that's what happened. A nurse came out and got my husband and I and brought us through the back doors of the ICU. And she left me standing 3 feet from the foot of bed 10. Now, I did not like what I saw lying in bed 10. So I started scanning the unit for another baby that looked more like Sam. And my husband picked up on what was going on, and he reached forward and he grabbed one of Sam's toes and he said, "These are Sam's toes. We know that this is him. We need to be here." And I didn't like his answer. So I continued looking around the unit, and the bedside nurse picked up on what was going on. And she came 3 feet to the foot of the bed, and she took my hand and she tucked it up underneath her arm, and she gave me a fist pump. No words that I know of, but just a fist pump. And then she did something remarkable. She walked me to the head of bed 10. And she said, "I need you to talk to him right now. He needs to hear your voice, not mine. I'm only a stranger." And while she worked with one hand, she said, "This blue tube is a ventilator, and it's allowing his major organs to rest. And the little tube coming out of the top of his head, that's called a ventriculostomy. We're pulling the blood off of his brain as fast as we can to help alleviate what will certainly be significant brain damage." And while she was working with one hand, taking care of a critically ill, dying patient, she was literally and figuratively holding me up with the other one. And I share that story because that nurse, her name was Lisa, that nurse was the most powerful human I had ever met up to that point in my life, because she empowered me to be a part of Sam's care in the most compassionate way under what I would perceive the most stressful circumstances possible. So that's sort of, we were told Sam would not survive his injuries. And then if he did, he would never be Sam again. And so we were told to hope for the best, but to plan for the worst. And so it's a long story with a lot of ups and downs in an ICU, as those stories often go. But quite miraculously, Sam did survive his injuries. And he did not stay in the hospital for 6 months as was expected. He was discharged much faster than that. And I attribute that to the fact that the care team members here really made us partners in his care. And I think that has a lot to do, despite the top-notch, incredible technical skill and knowledge of all the people that took care of him, it was really a privilege to walk in their shadows and witness what they were able to do for him. But with us right there, I can tell you I would have remained at least 3 feet from the bed, if not further away. My fear, my vulnerability would have kept me there. But that nurse let me know that I had a place. And that I had value at the head of the bed when I didn't recognize that own value in myself.
My goodness, so much to process there. shout out to Lisa. What an amazing person, right?
And I don't think she learned that in nursing school.
Yeah, there's something special about caretakers that can assess the situation and really have multiple patients in that moment. She grabbed you as a patient and took you where you needed to be. That's amazing. My goodness. How's Sam today, Caroline?
He is perfect. I sound like that mom, but today he is 16 years old. He's working on his driver's license. He has issues. He has, he'll probably always be a patient here. He's had some ophthalmology issues as a result of his trauma. But a few surprise things along the way. But for the most part, he plays basketball. He's a good student. He's a good, sweet, kind, I think would be the first adjective I would use, young man. And so, we have been given a gift, and, paying it forward and giving back is how I've dedicated my career in the wake of receiving this gift.
Does he clean up his socks in his room? That's
no.
Okay.
So let me take that back. Not perfect.
He's a normal teenage boy.
I was going to say, if so, can you give us some advice at our houses? So, Caroline, that is an amazing story and touches at the very heart of what we want to learn about. How do you focus on the patient? And talk to us about where you personally went after that and your career journey. You used the term professional healthcare stalker, and I'm excited to learn more about what that means. But give us the next chapter of this story, because it's a pretty special one.
Sure. So I didn't know what it was at first. I knew I wanted to give back, pay it forward. So I, after much time, healing and my own journey with my personal well-being, wanted to come back to the hospital and become a volunteer. And so I started volunteering on the units, which was hard some days. If you walk into a patient room that had a ventriculostomy and you weren't prepared for that, it could send you to a pretty dark place. But ultimately, I was invited to serve on the Patient and Family Advisory Council, and that sort of changed everything. That was a life-changing moment as well. And so my service with that group, meeting other patients and families, led to the opportunity for me to attend conferences all over the country. I learned I could write an essay and get free registration at American Hospital Association conference. My hospital sent me to a conference with the Institute for Patient and Family Center Care, and I met other people like me, men and women. I learned I wasn't so very special. I learned that there were people like me that were doing this work in healthcare organizations all over the country and all over the world, in fact, and that there was a name to the things that I was really passionate about. That respect and dignity, participation, the way we share information, and the way we collaborate all had a name to it, and people were working on this. And so I came back to MUSC with this renewed energy of, now I know what I want to do, and there's a path forward. And so initially, my first job at the Medical University was working specifically in the Children's Hospital, covering the ICUs for families. But every year that I was doing that, it became more clear that I wanted to figure out, how do we take a pocket of wonderful and translate that across a healthcare system? And while the pediatric ICU was, in my eyes, pretty perfect, there were still flaws. There were still some gaps. We experienced an error, one that we recovered from and that Sam recovered from. But for the most part, it was an outstanding, exceptional place to be in. But I realized that not every unit practiced the same way. That your care may depend on who's taking care of you that day or the culture of that particular unit. So how do we take patient and family center care, this idea of creating partnerships, and translate that across a healthcare system?
That's amazing. It's so interesting to me that you take this traumatic chapter in life and turn it into something that blesses so many other people. And so Caroline, we're just in awe of your efforts and what you've done and to make healthcare better for others. So we really respect that.
Too much. I mean, I think, once I started learning more about this and learning what other folks were doing, I established a mentor at another academic medical center. And that really helped me figure out really borrowing and stealing from what other people were doing in other places. And ultimately, we were able to convince leadership here at MUSC that we needed to create a dedicated position to this work. And that's ultimately what happened. And so serving as the patient and family center care person for the organization is now transcending across all of our hospitals and managing patient and family advisory councils, not just in pediatrics, but in the adult world too, and at the new community hospitals that we're acquiring around the state of South Carolina. And that's really exciting work, because then you get to be a part of stories beyond your own, and learning about how to influence these partnerships in really meaningful ways.
So Caroline, you recently told me about some of the current efforts to get a patient family advisory council working during a pandemic, and some of the challenges there, but also some of the successes. Can you talk a little bit about that? What did that look like at MUSC the past year, and how did you adapt?
Yeah, I think we can attribute some of our success to the fact that we were already up and running. When those signs went up the first day, I have this picture that I took of the sandwich boards that went up in front of our hospital. They're big, ugly red signs that said "No visitation allowed." That was just crushing for people like me who do this work, but for our patients and families. All around the world, patients were going into the hospital alone. They were going through procedures alone. They were dying alone. And so I was scared, because I thought, wow, a decade's worth of work could be crushed in a moment. And it was sort of this doom and gloom, and there was a lot of fear, and the signs went up, rightfully so, I should say, because our number one concern was keeping people safe and keeping people alive. I mean, to sound dramatic, but that's exactly what was happening. And so understandably, the signs went up. What I'm proud of is that the signs didn't stay up. So we were always working every day to ensure that we could make accommodations when it was appropriate and safe, to ensure that we could have one family member, and then two family members with every patient. In children's, we always allowed two caregivers to be with a patient. But in the adult world, it was a little different. But we were constantly, today, we just pushed out version 17 of our family presence and visitation guidelines. And I think that's just a testament to the fact that we're constantly working to make it better and get back to whatever our new normal is going to be.
I recall you talking about how you had to adapt during the pandemic for the PFAC, and I think you told me you went to a virtual format or something.
So I underestimated how nimble our patient and family advisors could be. And so on day one, our children's health PFAC was the first group to meet after we moved into emergency operations. So we quickly moved. At the time, I think our platform back then was WebEx. And I thought, oh, this is not going to work. We're an in-person group. We've always met in person. If we can't meet in person, in the past, we would cancel our meetings. But we quickly moved to a WebEx format, and I was really surprised the level of engagement that we got. If we were very clear about how to download the app and give people step-by-step instructions, they showed up. And what we learned is that it's a lot easier to click onto your computer into a meeting than it is to navigate the Charleston Peninsula, find parking, and then find a meeting space. We were all disappointed because we enjoyed being in person, but the level of engagement from both our staff and our volunteer patient and family advisors has been much better. And that surprised me. And because of that, not only our PFAC meeting attendance is better, our ability to put our patient and family advisors out into the health system on meetings, committees, task forces. So they're heavily embedded in the work that we do beyond the PFAC. And that is able to happen at a greater number because they can attend more meetings because they can do it from their home, or while they're picking their child up from school because they can do it from their mobile device as well. So we're getting participation in ways that I never dreamed of a year ago.
Do you have any specific examples of things that this committee helped guide during COVID and this unprecedented shift in care delivery, shift in visitation guidelines? How did you leverage them to change your strategy and make new decisions?
Yeah, I think it wasn't so much changing our strategy, it's that they were becoming more visible. So right away, our friends, I always say this work is about creating relationships, and it's so true. So the better my relations are, just as long as people know who I am, or if they get word that a patient and family advisor helped someone in another department. So I had a handful of advisors who were Johnny on the spot with reviewing patient-facing materials. So telehealth would reach out and say, hey, we've got this tip sheet for patients and families. What do you think about this? And I was like, well, it's a tip sheet for patients and families. Has a patient or family member looked at it yet? And so I had a few people, because they were home and the whole world was shut down, they would return it back, lickety split. And so people started to realize, hey, this can save us some time and energy because we've got folks that are willing to work with us on these projects. So everything from we were deploying iPads, right, in record numbers to help with a couple of things, not just rounding, but also with connecting with families. So like visitation. And so we deployed them, but then we didn't tell anyone how to use them. So we had to create tip sheets, not just for patients, but also for our staff. So they would know how and when to utilize the technology. The scarce resource allocation policy, we put patient and family advisors' eyes on that, and they joined that team. I mean, virtually everything, the family presence and visitation guidelines, that was the first thing that we worked on, making sure that the language, not that they're pushing back to say, no, it should be this way, but when we learn from from leadership about what needs to happen, we can help soften the language and say it in a way that's more about, bringing it back to this is always about safety. So literally anything that was going out patient facing, we wanted to make sure our patient and family advisors were a part of that process.
That's wonderful. That is great. Caroline, I want to hear a little bit about your patient story library and how that was created and what's going on there. What a cool concept. Can you describe that for our listeners a little bit?
Yeah, so we had this idea because we were sharing stories in particular venues. So we would have these leadership retreats, and I would bring in a patient or family member to share their story, sort of like as a connect to purpose moment, and always illustrating the core concepts of patient and family-centered care. And what we realized is that our leaders, or maybe a specific group of people, had the opportunity to hear these stories, but not everyone in the MUSC family was able to hear them. So how do we make these stories, these really powerful stories, accessible by everyone? And so that's how we decided to create the patient story library. So we thought, well, if we're going to make it accessible, it has to be on our online learning management system. And if we're going to tell these stories, we really don't want them to be 15 minutes long or even 10 minutes long. Well, if we're going to do that, then we're going to have to really teach people how to write their healthcare narratives, because not everyone knows how to do that. I didn't know how to do that. And when I look back at the way I used to tell my story, it was really long. And, most people don't want to sit through a long story. I think there's a way that we can do that, particularly in the, the busy world that we live in today, be able to take this profound experience, but share it in a way that won't take so much time. So we developed, I worked with a PhD on the academic side of our house, and she developed a beautiful curriculum teaching patients and families how to write their healthcare narratives. And we always did that in person. We've done these workshops. They were 3-hour-long workshop. And it was really time for us to do another workshop. And we thought, we'll kind of wait this COVID thing out. And then we decided, maybe we shouldn't wait this COVID thing out. And it just seems like the responsible thing to do to make this accessible to people across our state now that we have hospitals popping up all over the place. And we really want those perspectives too, because we want a diverse range of not just diagnoses, but race, culture, and background in our library. And so we have been putting our workshop on a platform so it can be accessed virtually by folks. And so, we'll see how that works, but I'm excited about it because we'll be able to create a bigger, more diverse library that will be accessible by students, faculty, and staff. And they can use the library to start a staff meeting. They can use it for continuing education, or they can use it, one leader can assign it to another staff member for just, learning. And again, connecting them to the reason why they got in healthcare to begin with. Some of the stories in the library are examples of things that we've done really well. And some of the stories are things that we don't do very well. We have one story in there that's even a tragic story that is very hard to hear, but really important that we learn from it to prevent it from ever happening again.
What a cool concept, really, to link the mission of the organization and let people participate. And I've got to think it's therapeutic for that patient as well to be able to vocalize or get that out and share it. There's a lot of benefit of being able to share what you're going through.
That's absolutely right. That's one of the things that Dr. Kerr talks about. So you're spot on, Adam, that there is a neurological component to that there's a great deal of healing that takes place when you learn how to write your story. And that wasn't the intention. The intention really is for teaching. We're giving our patients and families their own legacy of learning. My organization doesn't know this yet, but I'm getting ready to change the name of the library to Our Stories, because we're going to start including stories from our staff. And so instead of just being patient stories or family stories, we're going to include stories from our care team members as well, which I think will enrich the library a great deal.
So Caroline, as you know, at class, we focus on technology and we interview providers to help differentiate solutions on the market. And that is precisely to help improve healthcare. As we ask professionals about the technologies they use, we want to understand how it is more patient-centric or can be more patient-centric now. Do you have any examples of things that are working for you today that you would point to that this is really helping from the patient's perspective?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things. I mean, first and foremost, I think my answer won't be any different than any healthcare professional around the world right now, but I think the biggest thing is telehealth, right? So what we heard from our patients and families when we went into emergency operations was, this is horrible, this is terrible. However, all of a sudden I'm able to get a neuro appointment in 3 weeks instead of 6 months. And we want telehealth to be around forever. We always want to receive our care this way. Please don't ever let it go away, even when this is over. And so we were in a lucky position because we were already providing telehealth. We just had to ramp up our efforts because it was becoming exponentially the way we were providing care. So we were looking at things like our platform and different. I think providers do it different ways. So how do we sort of standardize that for our patients from department to department? So I would say telehealth is primarily it's a huge win. Particularly for people who come from all over the state that, it's really difficult for them to get in the car and make it to a clinic appointment. We have an interactive patient engagement platform that we use, the Get Well Network, which is, I think, once we get it up and running, I think particularly in our ICUs, it's been in existence in our hospital, but there are certain pockets where it didn't live that I think will be really beneficial. The use of MyChart, which I know these are like brand names, but I don't know what the general name would be. So, is huge because patients can schedule their own appointments. They can go in and read their own notes. I mean, these are things that I've seen through our patient and family advisory councils. I've heard patients and families get really excited about because it's a game changer in the way of time. Time spent. There's a lot of time spent when it comes to receiving care. And so those are the ones that stand out. And I would say when it comes to a lot of these, I think the thing that we want to keep in mind is always working to make it easier to use. I know for me as a healthcare professional, we were talking before we started the podcast that, I got stuck here last night fighting with technology for myself. But I know I hear from our patients and families a lot that sometimes it's just too hard. When you're laying in a bed and you're sick or your child is sick, it needs to be really easy or they're just not going to use it. If they have to figure something out, they're just not going to use it. And so we have to keep it as simple as possible.
So talk about where you think things should go next. What else does healthcare need to be more patient-centric? You shared a few things of what's working at your organization. Where would you like to see it go from here?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, if I had a magic wand, I don't know that I know what the end game or what that would look like, but I know for me and the work that I do, if I had a magic wand, that wand would say that whatever it is that we're doing, whether you're creating a new technology or you're providing clinical care somewhere, that there would be no decision that we make that impacts patients and families without having a patient or family member at the table with us when we're making that decision, right? Because ultimately it's going to save us time and money and effort, but then we're going to build something that works for everyone and not just us as the organization or the physician or the nurse. We're going to build it for everyone. And so we should have all those voices at the table. We should have the voice of the physician, we should have the voice of the nurse, and we should have the voice of the patient and family. And I'll just add that, sometimes I'm referred to as a patient advocate. And I would think that, just my disclaimer would be, I usually push back on that. I'm not a patient advocate. That's a very different role. But I'm an advocate for patient and family-centered care, which means I'm also an advocate for the surgeon and the nurse and the respiratory therapist. So my role is creating the partnerships and making sure that we all are working together on these things. And that's, again, I don't know if that answers the question the way you wanted it to be answered, but that's would be my dream for healthcare, is that the patients are at the center of everything that we do, but that they're a part of the planning and not just our consumers that we do to and for.
Well, Caroline, what an amazing perspective you've shared with us today. Thank you so much. I'm going to look for others that claim to be a professional healthcare stalker, and we'll know where that phrase came from. And what an amazing effort to take a tragedy and turn it into a way to elevate others. That is so fascinating and wonderful that you've done that. Well, thank you for joining. It's so great to see you and talk with you and get your advice. And we're here to support you in your efforts as well. So thanks again.
It was my privilege. Thank you so much for the invitation. I enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Wow, Dan, what a great visit we had with Caroline. Tell me, what jumped out at you in that discussion?
Obviously her heart-wrenching story of how she navigated her experience with Sam was so emotionally compelling. But the thing that really stuck out to me is how they're leveraging their patient-family council and how the patient is invited to the table in every decision they make. Rather than the technology being forced onto the patient after the fact, they're a stakeholder in the process of selecting that technology that's going to benefit them in the long run. What a great idea, and something that all organizations could and should potentially think about replicating.
I agree. It makes sense. It's common sense, not common practice, as they say. What a cool example of how it can be. So I got to share my parting quote. I thought about today's episode, and as you know, I'm a fan of Hamilton, the musical. And there's a little line in there that I thought would be great to share, which is, look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now. With all the challenge that's in healthcare and all the problems and things are really, really good. And we want to push it to be better, but we are lucky to be alive right now. So
certainly are. And thanks to our listeners for tuning in today. And thanks for not wrapping that at the end of the episode.
You got it. Well, with that, we would love to thank everyone for joining today's episode. And just a reminder, if we can support you in your efforts to make patients more of a center part of healthcare, please contact us. Please come to our website. We have resources that we're excited to share, which is classresearch.com, KLAS, research.com. Or if you have ideas or suggestions for future episodes of this podcast, we'd love to hear from you. And you can reach us at patientengagement@classresearch.com. Send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. So, Dan, any parting words before we go?
No, I don't think so. We'll see you at Chick-fil-A in the morning, I think.
Thanks.